Hey there, and welcome back to ClearPath Conversations. I'm Mark Bernardin. In episode 31, we talked about what executives evaluate when a CSM is in the room. In episode 32, we talked about how to build your way into the room when access wasn't just given to you. Today, we're talking about what happens while you're in the room, specifically how to read it accurately. This is a skill that matters in every meeting, but it matters most at the executive level because the stakes are higher, the signals are subtler, and the consequences of misreading them are much more significant. An executive who loses confidence in a meeting rarely tells you directly. They just don't take the next one. I I want to start with something that I think is foundational to this whole conversation. Executive meetings almost never go exactly as planned. And that's not a failure. That's just the nature of the format. Executives don't sit in meetings to follow your agenda. They engage when something captures their interest and they disengage when it doesn't. They pivot to what they actually care about, regardless of what's on the slide. They ask questions that have nothing to do with where you were in the presentation. And if you're not reading those shifts in real time and adjusting accordingly, you end up completing your agenda while the executive has mentally left the building. The ability to read the room, to pick up on what's happening in the conversation beneath the surface of the words, is what separates a CSM who leaves a meeting having delivered a presentation from a CSM who leaves a meeting having had a conversation that mattered. Those those are very different experiences from the executive's perspective. Let me walk through the specific signals that I've learned to watch for because I think naming them makes them actionable. The first signal is agenda engagement. When an executive leans forward, makes eye contact, asks follow up questions, or starts writing something down, they're engaged. That topic, that idea, that data point just captured their attention. When that happens, do not move on. The instinct, especially when you have a prepared deck, is to cover everything you planned. Resist it. Stay where the energy is. Ask a question that deepens the conversation on that topic. Let the meeting go where the executive is interested in rather than where your slide order says to go next. Now, the opposite signal is disengagement. They check their phone, their eye contact shortens, they start answering questions just on a surface level rather than engaging with the substance. They glance towards the door. These are not subtle signals. They're telling you that what's happening in the room is not worth their full attention. When you see this, you have a decision to make. Either change what you're doing immediately or accept that you're gonna lose the rest of the meeting. Changing course in the middle of a meeting is uncomfortable. It requires you to set aside the structure that you prepared and navigate without a map. But the CSMs who are best at executive meetings have made their peace with doing exactly that. I can tell this is landing differently than I expected. Let me come at this from a different angle. Uh, is that's one of the most effective pivots that you can make. It demonstrates self awareness, which is in itself a form of credibility. The second category of signals is verbal. The things executives say that mean something different from the literal words. That's interesting, delivered flatly, is almost never a compliment. It's a polite way of saying that what you just said didn't land the way you expected. Pay attention to tone and context, not just the words. We've tried something like that before, is frequently a setup for telling you why your idea won't work, but it's also an invitation. The right response is tell me about that experience because the answer reveals something about the account's history and what actually drives their skepticism. What does that mean for us specifically? Is the best question an executive can ask in the middle of your presentation. It means they're engaged enough to want to apply what you're saying to their situation. This is where your preparation pays off. Now, if you've done your homework, you have a specific answer ready. If you haven't, this is where vague responses are going to cost you. And we'll have to circle back to that. Often means that they're just not interested enough to invest more time in it today. Sometimes sometimes that's a legitimate scheduling constraint, but when paired with other disengagement signals, it's frequently a graceful way of closing a line of conversation. The third category of signals is relational. How the executive is positioning themselves and you relative to one another in the conversation. When an executive starts asking your opinion, not your company's position, but your opinion, that's that's a significant shift. It means they've decided you might have something worth hearing. That moment's valuable. Don't deflect with corporate language or hedge everything into meaninglessness. Give them your honest perspective. When an executive starts referencing conversations or decisions that didn't involve you, bringing you into their internal context, that's a sign of developing trust. They're treating you like someone who can handle that information and who might have something useful to contribute to it. And when an executive starts shortening their explanations because they assume that you'll understand the context without it, that's one of the clearest signals that you've moved from vendor relationship to trusted advisor. They they no longer feel the need to explain their world to you because they assume that you're already there. Building toward that moment is the long game of executive relationship management. You don't get there by being good in one meeting. You get there by being consistently good across many interactions over time. Let me talk about one specific situation that requires particular skill. And that's the meeting that starts to go sideways. Not dramatically sideways, not an escalation or an angry customer. I mean the meeting where you realize somewhere in the middle of it that the dynamic is different than you expected. The executive is less engaged than you hoped. The questions are skeptical in a way that feels almost adversarial. Or more subtly, you sense that something happened before you walked in the room that's affecting how they're showing up. Now, what I've learned to do in those moments is slow down and just name what I'm observing, but carefully, not accusatorially, something more like, I want to make sure I'm making the best use of your time today. Is there something more pressing I should know about before we continue? That question does several things. It demonstrates situational awareness. It gives the executive permission to surface whatever's actually on their mind. And it stops you from continuing to deliver a presentation that just isn't landing, which would make things worse. Sometimes that question opens the conversation entirely. The executive tells you there's a budget situation that you didn't know about, or there's a team concern that's been festering, or they had a difficult conversation with their board that morning and they're just distracted. Now you have real information. You can adjust. You can be genuinely useful rather than just proceeding through a prepared agenda. The ability to create that kind of space, to make it safe for the executive to tell you what's actually happening, is one of the most valuable things a CSM can bring to a room. In the next episode, we're tackling what is genuinely one of the highest stakes situations in enterprise CS: the departure of your executive sponsor. How to navigate champion loss without losing the account. What to do in the first 48 hours, and how to build the relationship with a successor without treating the transition like a sales call. Follow the show on your favorite platform. Connect with me on LinkedIn at linkedin.com/in/Mark Bernardin. And before your next executive meeting, spend 5 minutes thinking not about what you're going to say, but about what signals you're going to watch out for. That shift in focus changes the quality of the conversation. Thank you for being here. Thank you for doing this work. And thank you for showing up and delivering every single day. I'll talk to you soon.